Looks like somebody's got a question. I'd better answer it. So today I have a question from somebody who calls themselves Observer. Anyway, uh, the question is an interesting one though, and the answer is going to be kind of lengthy. So uh, grab yourself a coffee, sit down, get ready. Anyway, the question is between electricity and hydrogen fuel, which one is more environmentally friendly to produce? Um, This is a very kind of variable question to answer because there are a lot of things that could or may or may not be involved in the production of hydrogen and or electricity. So right now, most hydrogen is produced through a process called steam reformation. That's a process where they take natural gas and they push it through a very high temperature steam, and that separates the natural gas and CO2 from the hydrogen H2. Um, so natural gas is a combination of those two things. When they're split, you end up with hydrogen and CO2. Um, it's a very efficient method of producing hydrogen in production, and its final product is carbon monoxide, which is also a useful chemical, and a small amount of carbon dioxide. The carbon monoxide comes about because the steam combines with separating carbon and creates that. So another way to make hydrogen that is not very common, it's more common in third world countries right now, just because it's an accessible way to make hydrogen, and that is to put coal under extreme pressure, which off gases. It off gases natural gas, which can then be reformed in as before. Um, there's a new one being used now where they're taking excess electricity from zero sources like windmills and solar panels and so forth, and they're using that to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. They release the oxygen into the air and they capture the hydrogen. Um, the water doesn't have to be clean, so this is a great way to use dirty wastewater from other sources and make something out of it instead of putting all the effort into cleaning it, because then the other things that are in the water can just be captured. So it's a kind of a win-win in a lot of ways, but again, you have to have excess production in order to do it. Most of it is uh, being used as a in lieu of battery storage or other option for using that excess of power. Um, there are some biomass options for hydrogen. They are kind of in their infancy. They're not very common, but they are a way to have certain strains of algae and other things produce hydrogen as a off gas. So it's kind of in its infancy. There are some test farms that have been running in Nevada and other places. You really do have to have a fairly warm climate and a lot of sunlight to make this work. But it is something that is being tested and tried, and over time it could potentially become something that gets used on a mass scale. Um, Now, going to electricity, there are a lot of production options for electricity. In the 100 or so years that we've used electricity on the regular, we've come up with a whole lot of ways to make it, distribute it, and store it, and etc. So, the most common in the U.S. is to burn natural gas. So you burn natural gas, heat water, that turns a turbine, that creates electricity. Similarly, the same turbine option can be used in hydroelectric. So if you have a dam on a major river or in a not necessarily fast, but moving body of water that's large enough, then you can produce electricity that way. A lot of the electricity in the northwestern part of the U.S. is produced with hydro, so that's a way to do it. Most of the power in the U.S. that is not created by natural gas is made by burning coal. Same option, same thing, turning a turbine by burning the coal. Uh, There is the newer forms of making electricity that are gaining ground are wind, the giant turbines that spin, and also solar, which is gaining popularity where solar works best, which would be places like Southern California, Arizona, places like that, where the weather doesn't tend to turn against solar production. For example, where I live here in Wyoming, solar panels are not terribly popular. When you do see solar panels, they're usually for heating, not electricity production, and that's entirely because we get random hailstorms of varying intensity, and they can be bad enough that they will just shatter a solar panel. People move here a lot, build a greenhouse, and then find out why nobody here has a greenhouse pretty early on. So that's an option. Another option that is finally coming back around is nuclear energy. So nuclear energy in the older production method was working. It was relatively clean, but it had a lot of byproduct that was hard to deal with, and it was not necessarily the stablest option. Anything goes wrong in that process, and it's possible for serious things like Chernobyl to happen. But newer methods that have been devised and that are being used and tested right now. In fact, here in Wyoming, there is a new one going in that is financed by several large players, including Bill Gates. It's a new process that is much, much safer for producing nuclear power. And in a lot of places, nuclear power is an excellent option. So it's more popular in Europe than it is here, but again, that is another way to produce electricity. So all of those ways have ups and downs. Some of them produce questionable things. Some of them are only productive at certain times, so they're not terribly reliable. And some of them are cleaner than others. So out of the whole group, the cleanest in terms of production and output, so total possible output, average output, and cleanliness is probably wind power, but I think I would kind of scale that because the problem with wind power is if it's a 2 megawatt system, it's actually on average going to produce less than one. So you have to really balance that. And the wind towers, there are some other problems that we're just now learning about with them that may push them way back and make it a much worse option than other options that we might have. But the point is, this is how things are produced. So most of the answer to this question of what is cleanest really kind of rests on what type of production you're looking at. And I would say that compared to the most common steam reformation of hydrogen and the most common electricity production, burning natural gas, that the hydrogen production is slightly greener. It produces less CO2, but otherwise the two are very comparable because you're literally just taking the same source and doing something with it. Then you have to factor in with this steam reformation, you have to factor in things like the storage and transport of the hydrogen that's produced versus the electricity that's produced through the natural gas burning. So I think if you were to take the two and really compare them, it's probably a wash. It may actually come out in favor of just burning the natural gas to make power. In terms of efficiency, the most efficient method of making electricity is hydropower. So the big downer with those is that when you build that dam to have those turbines for that water to run through, you cause extreme disruption to the local ecosystem. You completely change what's happening around it. So it's a win in that In most of the places where these dams could be created, they already have been. It's a loss in that that environmental damage is already done, and if we want to build more of them, we're going to cause more damage. So hydropower is great if it already exists and has already done its damage, because that damage really doesn't reverse. So yeah, it's kind of hard. I mean, this is a really difficult question to answer, and I don't think there is a definitive answer. But my total assumption would be that for the most part, if you can produce the electricity and store it, it's going to be more efficient than the losses and costs incurred in producing hydrogen and storing and transporting it. Hydrogen can't be just put on an electrical line and sent somewhere, and it can't be shoved into a battery and left indefinitely. Hydrogen, there are no containers that fully contain hydrogen, and hydrogen is a highly volatile thing, so it's a much more difficult thing to deal with than is just pure electricity that you can literally turn on and off at any point without loss. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I know there's going to be a lot of commentary on this. I did not go into extreme depth here, and there's always a lot of argument around this kind of topic, but that is my take on it, and that is what I know about the whole H2 versus electric ecosystem, or whatever it's called. So there you go. This has been Aaron. So you got a question? I know you do. You got more than just trolling comments to give me. I know that. So take a question, ask it. Hit me up down in the comments below here. Find me on aarononautos.com. Look me up on Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. Make sure you DM or IM me because I won't see it if I'm not somehow tagged or notified that you've asked me something. So any kind of question you got, and you don't even have to use your name. So cool. Talk to you again soon.